We're now live, Chair.
Hello and good evening, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the Windsor and Ascot Development Management Committee on the 5th of June 2025. My name is Councillor Neil Knowles and I will be chairing this meeting. This meeting is being held in person, via Zoom and streamed live to the public on YouTube. I remind all attendees that participation in the meeting indicates consent to the audio and video being streamed live and acknowledgement that after the meeting it will continue to be available in the public domain. There are no fire drills scheduled for this evening, but if the fire alarm does sound, please leave via the nearest fire exit and make your way out to the front entrance opposite the barracks. That is probably the quickest way out, just behind us there. Firstly, it would be useful if all committee members and officers could introduce themselves so the public are aware of who is in this meeting and the role they're undertaking. I've already introduced myself, and to my right.
Councillor Mark Wilson, Vice Chair.
Councillor Devon Davis. Councillor Julian Teasy.
Councillor Karen Davis, a voting member of the panel.
Councillor Sandra Luxton, voting member of the panel.
Councillor David Buckley, voting member of the panel.
I'm Katrina Herbert, legal advisor to the panel.
Kim Woodley, clerk to the committee.
Chloe Plummer, Democratic Services Officer.
Bryony Franklin, Senior Planning Officer.
Jo Richards, Development Management Team Leader.
Adrian Waits, Assistant Director of Panel.
I request that meeting participants do not speak unless I specifically invite you to do so. Once I've invited you to speak, before you do so, please state your name and the capacity in which you are speaking, if appropriate. I'll also ask officers to speak at appropriate times. The way the meeting will flow is there'll be a presentation. The panel members, after the representations by the public or other interested parties, then the members will ask questions of the officers. And when they're satisfied, then we'll go to the debate phase. I remind everybody regarding the training we had recently to make sure we maintain balance in the debate and mention all the different factors we're considering. If any individual attempts to disrupt the meeting, I'm able to use my powers in the Constitution to adjourn the meeting or have the individual removed. I'd also like to remind councillors that to improve our time and effectiveness as a committee, I would ask you please limit the repetition of questions and points which have already been raised by others. Where possible, please put forward all new points or questions which you would like raised during your request to speak. We'll now start on the agenda items. Do we have any apologies for absence?
No apologies, Chair.
Agenda items 2, declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor Buckley.
Yes, so on items 4 and 6, obviously as being the ward councillor, I just want to raise that, but I come to the panel with an open mind.
Thank you. Do we now, item 3, approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of May as a true and accurate record? Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Moving now to agenda item 4, which is full planning application 24/00381 for Liquid Leisure, Horton Road, Datchet, Slough. I will pass this over now to, I believe, Jo is leading with this, and Jo will now present the application.
Thank you, Chair. So the proposal is for the regularisation of unauthorised facilities and change of use to include non-water polluting activities and non-propelled water sports, use of boathouse as reception, shop, and storage of hire and maintenance equipment in association with water-based activities. So firstly, by way of a background and introduction, an enforcement notice was served in December 2020. The alleged breaches included, without planning permission, the material change of use of the land from a water skiing and windsurfing use to a mixed use that comprises an aqua theme park, caravan and camping site, party venue, children's play centre with associated operational development comprising extension to existing buildings, new buildings, kiosks and other structures that are integral to the mixed use. An enforcement notice appeal was lodged and subsequently withdrawn in 2022 following the tragic accident at the site. This current application seeks to regularise the planning breaches and seeks to reduce and consolidate the water-based activities and operational development. Many structures and uses have already been removed and ceased. The Northern Lake is proposed to be used for open water swimming, paddleboarding, and a small aqua park and beach is to be retained. The children's soft play in the former boathouse and the attached cafe are to be removed. The reasons for issuing the enforcement notice have been satisfactorily overcome in terms of the impact on the greenbelt, character and appearance of the site in the area, flood risk and ecology matters. This application deals with the planning aspects only. Issues relating to public safety in terms of the operation of the site are dealt with separately under health and safety legislation. The recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to the completion of a satisfactory legal agreement and the conditions listed in section 14 of the committee report. So onto the plans. So this is the location plan of the site. The site lies in Datchet and comprises a lake divided by a narrow island. The southern part of the lake is used for water skiing, a lawful operation. The current application is primarily concerned with activities on the Northern Lake and land used in association with it. The lake is bordered by trees and the remainder of the site comprises grassland and woodland. To the south of the site lies the railway line and the River Thames. To the north lies the Queen Mother Reservoir. Lakes lie to the northwest and southeast of the site. Datchet Common Brook runs close to the eastern boundary. Residential properties lie to the north and east. In terms of the constraints of the site lies within the Greenbelt, lies within flood zones, fluvial flood zones 2 and 3, which have a medium and high probability of flooding. The site is a designated wildlife site. The southeast portion of the site lies within a 400-metre buffer zone of the Southwest Water Bodies Special Protection Area. For this reason, a habitats regulations assessment has been carried out as part of the application. A public right-of-way runs along the western and part of the southern boundary of the site. So this slide shows, apologies. This slide shows one of the site plans submitted with the application, and it shows specifically items removed and to be removed, indicated in red. And I say this because the application was submitted about a year ago now. So at that time, some of the items had already been removed, and throughout the course of the year, some further items have been removed. So those are shown in red on the plan, and I can just read them out here for your information if you can't read the key. So there's a group check-in and waiver area, a bus bar and party bus, high rope, retaining wall, and the Ninja Warrior Aqua Park on the lake here. So they've all been removed. And then items for removal, cafe and buggy store to be removed, and the soft play to be relocated from the boathouse, kitchen and food collection, and that's to be converted to a wetsuit collection, booking office, toilets, beach huts, info kiosk, changing rooms, wetsuit collection, buoyancy aid collection, concrete paving, junior aqua park, and the Ninja Warrior Aqua Park. So the aqua parks are the inflatables on the lake, and many of the other uses and buildings to be or have been removed are on the North Shore. The items to be retained are also listed on this plan, but I have another plan here. So in comparison, this does show a much reduced use of the site and more consolidated in terms of the buildings to be retained. and just showing this a bit more enlarged on the screen. So items proposed and to be retained. Screening and planting added along the lake bank. Grass to replace concrete paving. A lakeside bar. Storage for hire and maintenance equipment and reception shop retained. Wetsuit collection, hot room. Entrance kiosk. Wooden changing huts, those have been removed. And the aqua park has been reduced in size and relocated. First aid room, again, that's relocated, and a storage room, and then a slope to replace the existing retaining wall. So in comparison, going back to how the park was originally laid out when the enforcement notice was served, it is a much reduced operation in terms of the buildings and facilities proposed as part of this application. And then looking at some of the buildings in a bit more detail, this is the boathouse plan, which is to the northeast of the lake. So as stated, the site lies within the functional flood zone 3B, and within the functional floodplain, only water compatible uses are accepted. So for those reasons, the children's soft play and the cafe extension are therefore to be removed. This is an elevation of the boathouse. The boathouse itself as a structure was an authorised structure, not part of the enforcement notice. However, the uses within have had to be relocated or removed. The buildings are to be retrofitted with flood grills to prevent a reduction to floodplain capacity. And yes, as stated, the boathouse itself is a lawful structure. That's one of the largest buildings on the site. Other buildings to be retained, there's a hot room close to the lakeside, and flood grills are proposed to be inserted into the elevations. An entrance kiosk. First aid room, that building's to be relocated. And a storage building, again showing flood grills. All these buildings, the plans, the flood risk assessment has been subject to consultation with the EA throughout the course of the application. And now moving on to some photographs. So on the left-hand side is a view of the northern part of the lake and the buildings and the beach. And that's taken from the central island in between the two parts of the lake. And then on the right-hand side is a view of the southern lake, which is currently used for water skiing. And then here on the left, it shows the concrete paving, retaining wall and buildings which have been removed along the northern shore of the lake and grass reinstated. On the right-hand side, this is the location of where the party buses and beach huts were. So they've been removed, paving reduced and grass reinstated. On the left, that's the beach which has been retained. On the right-hand side is the entrance kiosk, retained and repainted. So again, some more photos of the buildings. The buildings to be retained have been repainted green. They previously were quite brightly coloured. On the right-hand side is the former boathouse building, and that's now to be comprising water-compatible uses, including storage, wetsuit hire, and the reception area. On the left is the hot room, and then on the right-hand side there's a view of the lake and the buildings looking from the eastern part of the site. This is a view of the island between the North and South Lakes. And then building U with a storage building as shown in the site plan. Again, painted green. And I think this is the final photo. So it's a view of the site from the entrance park, the entrance and car park to the north. So just to explain some of the main considerations, the main planning considerations for the application. An exception to an appropriate development within the Greenbelt listed within paragraph 154 of the NPPF is the provision of appropriate facilities, including buildings for outdoor sport and recreation, as long as the facilities preserve the openness of the Greenbelt and do not conflict with the purposes of including land within it. The proposal is considered to meet this exception and is therefore an appropriate development. The flood risk implications of the application have been assessed. The Environment Agency have reviewed the flood risk assessment alongside all the plans and elevations and have no objection to the application subject to conditions. The removal and consolidation of buildings, the scaling back of activities and the painting of buildings has reduced the visual impact of the development on the character and appearance of the site and the locality in general. The site is sensitive in terms of ecology, falling within and close to several important sites and protection areas. Ecology surveys and assessments submitted with the application have been found acceptable by the Council's ecologist. A habitats regulations assessment has been carried out and Natural England have been consulted and raised no objection. So in terms of the conclusion and planning balance, the reduction and consolidation of the buildings to be used in association with the proposed outdoor sport and recreation uses will satisfactorily regularise the unauthorised facilities and uses which are subject to the enforcement notice. The proposal has an acceptable impact on the Greenbelt, the character and appearance of the site and locality, flood risk, ecology and biodiversity, highway safety, parking and sustainability and climate change, subject to securing appropriate conditions and a unilateral undertaking. The proposal has been found to be compliant with the development plan and therefore in accordance with paragraph 11C of the NPPF, permission must be granted. The applicant will be required to adhere to health and safety regulations outside the planning remit. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you indeed. If we can now open for members' questions, if anybody has one. First, we go down.
Oh, so just a fairly technical one to start with. In the design and access statement, it says the junior aqua park is being relocated. I can see where it was from the plans, but I can't see where it's going. Maybe it's being subsumed into the main aqua park, but I can't quite tell.
Can you just hold that thought? I've jumped ahead of myself.
Oh, yeah,
But before I get told off by Miss Moody is looking at me with a very, very devilish look. Councillor Larkham is our speaker as a councillor for the area which it's in. If you'd like to step forward, Councillor Larkham. Do apologise, we're going out of sequence. Normal rules, 3 minutes, 1 minute warning from Miss Moody, and as soon as you're ready, time starts when you start speaking. Thank you, Councillor Larkham.
Good evening. I'm reading this one. My name is Ewan Larkham. After 20 years of living in Wraysbury, I've lived in Datchet since 1977 and been a member of Datchet Parish Council almost continuously since 1986. Today I'm also on both Horton and Wraysbury Parish Councils. I'm now in my 7th year as RBWM Datchet Horton and Wraysbury Ward Councillor. Decades ago, I was sitting as a parish councillor in Datchet Village Hall when the applicant at the back spoke about 2 small gas-powered boats. In my opinion, this was the thin end of the wedge. Over the years, the activities on this site expanded significantly, accompanied by some planning applications and some enforcements. The original single disused gravel pit is now divided into 2. It is a gravel pit. It is not a lake, or even 2 lakes. Soon after the incident in August 2022, the flowers placed at the Horton Road entrance were removed. That single act exposed the primary objectives of the management. In practice, Liquid Leisure has failed to follow the rules for decades. Thus, I see no justification for retrospective planning approval. Even if retrospective approval was given, I have no confidence in their ability or willingness to comply. This is a cultural shortcoming, but not unique to liquid leisure. Does it need a sign outside the gate that says Kyra Hill was unlawfully killed here? This RBWM committee simply needs to demonstrate that it has learned, and I invite you to reject this application now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Larkham. I think a couple of points that Councillor Larkham made, if it could be addressed, could you do that perhaps, Adrian?
So I think the key one is we've got to be very careful here tonight. We're sitting here as a planning committee to determine a planning application on the basis of the development plan and taking into account material planning considerations. So in general, when dealing with a planning application, the system is applicant blind. Anyone can apply for planning permission on any land. That does not necessarily mean that the person who's applied will be the operator. It doesn't necessarily mean that anyone in particular will be the operator. So we can't base things on things that people may perceive were failings of the previous operator. And that has obviously already been dealt with through the courts in the appropriate way. What we're here to look at is a recreational use on the water, an appropriate planning use for the site, bearing in mind that much of the health and safety issues should be covered by other requirements under health and safety legislation, and bearing in mind, of course, that there is always an inherent risk with any activity associated with water. Is this site in itself fundamentally dangerous, or is it acceptable in planning use terms, subject to whoever operates it being responsible, having the right measures in place, which they would need to do under other legislation? I think that's just very key. It's obviously a very upsetting thing that happened, that nobody ever wishes to happen in the borough or anywhere. But it is very important that we distinguish the duty we've got to do tonight from the duty of others who have looked into matters.
Thank you, Adrian. If we can go now into members' questions, we did have Councillor Davis was running off to start, and then Councillor Davis too, and then Councillor Buckley is the order of runs at the moment. Off you go, Councillor Davis.
Yeah, I can repeat it best I can. It's in the design and access statement. It says that the junior aqua park is being relocated. I can see where it was in the plans. It's in the big red rectangle where it's being moved, but I can't see where it's being relocated to. Maybe it's being made part of the main aqua park, but I can't quite tell. Sticking to clarification on that.
Yeah.
So I'm just showing the slide here, which has the items to be removed. It shows a large aqua park labelled S, high ropes Q, and Ninja Warrior Aqua Park W, and then Junior Aqua Park R. So those 4 different sort of water-based inflatables and activities. They're all going, and will be replaced by one aqua park in a slightly different location and of a smaller size. That's a bit bigger there. So it's gone from those sort of 4 areas or activities to just the one of a reduced size.
Councillor Karen Davis.
Thank you, Chair. I had a couple of questions. I noticed that Datchet Parish Council in their comment were asking to come to the meeting in the sort of comments in the submitted earlier were asking to come. Did they get the opportunity to? I'm guessing Councillor Larkham speaking in a ward councillor capacity this evening. Did the Parish Council have the opportunity to come?
I mean, we would have notified parties as part of the notification of the committee meeting as normal, and anyone who has speaking rights or the opportunity would have had the ability to contact democratic services to register. So Councillor Larkham is the member who contacted us to register. I think Kim would be able to confirm that we didn't have any other people asking.
No, I had no other requests to speak.
Okay, thank you. And my second question was about safety. It does say in 10.24 that the safety of children and the public in relation to the proposed outdoor sports and recreation uses is a material planning consideration. To obviously the final sentence of that paragraph would not cause that it wouldn't cause issues relating to public safety, provided the correct precautions are carried out in the operation of the site as required by health and safety legislation. Obviously that's maybe not something that we can discuss. It would be seeing as safety is a material planning consideration, and yet we're saying we're dealing with this on purely planning grounds. It's quite hard to know where to draw the line.
Yeah, well, Adrian.
Yes, I mean, I'll try and answer this as best I can. I think it's always a tricky one where there's different bits of legislation covering different things. So in terms of planning, we look at land use and physical structures, etc., on the site. So I think if we had reason to believe that there was fundamentally something really unsafe about a particular use next to the water, if there was a steep drop with no railings or things like that that were really obvious and intrinsic to the layout of the site and the land, then I think you could deal with those through the planning system and ask for railings or deal with it through physical design. I think the issue here is it's much more about the management of the site as to whether there's adequate things in place for the safety. It's about the ratio of lifeguards, the advice that's given to parents, whether people are provided with life jackets, and that's a level of detail we can't deal with through the planning system. We as planning officers don't know what the right requirements are, and indeed the requirements might change depending on precisely what an operator does on site or how their operations change, and that's why that aspect of it really has to be dealt with separately. We don't think as officers there's anything intrinsically more dangerous about this site than any other, so long as it has the right health and safety provisions in and is operated properly. But obviously it's for members to discuss.
Thank you. It seems that provided the correct precautions are carried out in the operation of the site, is doing quite a lot of the heavy lifting in this particular paragraph. I'm disappointed that the applicant hasn't come to speak to us this evening. I think that would have been helpful.
I think it's fair to say that you don't have to click it for the application. So it's a thing there. Councillor David Buckley.
Yes, I'm going to ask for a little bit of licence, Chair, but hopefully you'll get the gist, and I think it's very relevant when we brought it up in previous meetings as well. One of the things, and obviously Councillor Davies touched on it in regards to the weight of the safety. I would like to deal with accuracy first. On the officer's presentation, it dealt with accident. It's actually unlawful killing. It's not really deemed an accident. And I'll go on to get the coroner's report. And while this is relevant to this planning application, I think it is. Liquid Leisure, the water park, had insufficient planning permission for its operations, including its use of a party venue and child play area. Key points taken from the coroner's report is lack of planning permission. Now, this leads me on to conversations I've had with officers before about, and I do feel sympathetic to our team, but it's my concern over conditions, how we enforce them, our ability to enforce them, and the dangers that can represent after a planning application is done. So if it is a serious condition that we should reflect on in planning, and we can make and see, even though I take the officer's comment in regards to you don't see an issue, but if that particular aqua park was still on there, obviously led to the situation in question by putting an aqua park there and leaving it in a position where it could cause a further injury or risk of death, then surely that's a consideration I feel should be there. So what I want to ask is, subject to obviously panel members making their decision tonight, the aqua park has been reduced by 50% in size, which is taking into consideration that's going to have less risk than the 100% size that was there before, which was substantial, in the 4 areas which obviously would have allowed for more risk to take place when the planning, well, there was no planning commission because they didn't half it, you know. So firstly, what will stop them doing what they did before as an operator by doing exactly what they want when they want, get this planning commission and then just put 4 elements there? How will we be able, and can we get convincing commitment from officers today that if we obviously approve this application, that we can manage it from a planning aspect, not from health and safety, planning, i.e. when something isn't proper on that site, can you guarantee us that it will be enforced and that will be removed or an application put in to reassess the situation? Because that would obviously make a weighted change to what we're approving here tonight. And all that we've seen in the past, and the coroner's report reiterates, is we did not do that before. So I need confidence approving applications, and this particular application, in terms of knowing that we can manage this process going forward. So that's one thing. Again, that leads on to me. So the items you noted in your report, items were removed. Those items shouldn't have been there in the beginning, but a lot of them have been removed. You know, what is there that is going to give us confidence that we can make a decision tonight and we're not adding to, as Councillor Davies says, significant dangers to the public, even though I take the officer's comments that you don't deem it as dangerous. I think it's been proven that once it's out of control, it becomes very, very dangerous. So we need to make a decision, an informed decision here tonight. So, you know, and this leads on from my conditions I've mentioned before in previous planning meetings, whereby we install and we put conditions in place, and we need to make sure we can actually adhere to those and make them happen.
So the background to the question is, could there be conditions placed around safety or the operation of the site? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, not safety, but it's can we enforce it? We didn't enforce it before. What has changed at RBWM's end to make sure we will enforce it and make sure this particular area will be managed by the planning department? I'm not worried about health and safety. That's a separate issue which will hopefully enforce and reduce the risk. But from a planning aspect, what confidence can we have that the planning department will not allow the repeat of this situation again, whereby we're pulled into disrepute by the coroner to say it's a lack of planning permission, it's an oversight?
Okay, I mean, there's a couple of points I think I need to clarify just for accuracy, and so we're talking about accurate information here, because it's not the case that the planning department or the enforcement team didn't do things about the site previously, and I don't think any criticism in the coroner's report about lack of planning is to do with the actions of the planning authority. So the planning authority was taking action in relation to the enforcement plan in relation to identified matters. The first step in the council's enforcement plan, as is good practice in planning, is to try and resolve the issues through agreement without the need for formal action. Obviously, that then got to a stage where the council decided its efforts to resolve things in that way weren't working, and the council did serve a formal enforcement notice. The issue that follows that is once someone appeals the enforcement notice, which is what happened here, effectively the requirements of the notice go on to hold while the planning inspectorate deal with the enforcement notice, and it took the planning inspectorate a very long time to deal with that enforcement notice appeal. So I think the council did take action. The fact that there was an enforcement notice, ultimately the appeal was withdrawn, and so that enforcement notice was upheld. And indeed, that is a strong thing in its own right, because it does mean anything that was in the enforcement notice that isn't covered by this planning permission, there is actually an extant enforcement notice in place for, that the council could more swiftly use enforcement action, because that breach is already confirmed through the enforcement notice. So if anything outside of this that was covered by that notice were reinstated, we could almost skip out that step of having to serve a notice and go straight to the prosecution stage. So I think that's quite important to bear in mind.
Have you an idea to give us an idea of how long this started, the enforcement started, time-wise? Because that gives it put it in perspective, doesn't it, really?
Just give me a moment, Chair, I'll look into it.
No, it's, we're talking about month and year, not day, day of the week. So.
We had a certificate of lawfulness submitted in 2020, and that was to determine whether the way that the site was being used and the structures and the facilities, so that was including movable structures, party buses, the bar service, the aqua park and everything. So that was submitted in 2020 and refused in 2020. And we issued a breach of condition notice in October 2021.
Yeah, so just clarify, there was another stage. There was a formal enforcement notice issued before the breach of condition notice. So I'll just check the date of that. That was issued on the 21st of December 2020.
I think really the problem is the length of the process, isn't it? Clagged up.
I just want to come back on the point. I apologise if it meant that I was inferring it was the planning authority who were brought up by the coroner. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying how planning can affect situations, and it was brought up by the coroner. The lack of planning permission and how the site got out of control contributed to the death of that person. I wasn't saying that the planning authority was responsible in any way, shape or form. And I said that I was sympathetic to the officers and the issues you had. But as a member and a voting member of the panel, I just need confidence. And this isn't the first time I've mentioned this since I've been sitting on this panel about our ability to enforce after we've made planning permission. And obviously that situation, as the chair's rightly gone to, it's the length of the process. But so again, going back to the process would be if this individual who has breached all these conditions previously did it again, we would then go through that process again. I noticed that obviously the timeline 2020 and 2021 was a year before the incident. And obviously we were as an organisation, we trying to put as much pressure on before that, and subsequently then this issue happened. Going forward now into this new application, what confidence have we got that things would change and we could deal with an issue before it ends up with a...
Again, I think it's worth bearing in mind, we have to consider what's in front of us, not what might be. It's very difficult, I know, but I think we have to look at it as it is, as a current application, rather than mulling over what might happen. There's a lot of might happens, as we know, with everything, really. And I think really if we keep it onto what's in front of us. Katrina?
Thank you, Chair. If it helps, just to reassure members, I know we can't look at get into health and safety. It's a separate statutory regime, but I think it would, if it gives members confidence when they're thinking about the planning aspects of this matter, and given the tragic circumstances that we all learned about, horrific situation, but the members have heard about the planning enforcement, and that the situation about the planning enforcement predates the tragedy. But I do take Councillor Buckley's point about the activities that were going on site, which were at a scale, and there was that comment by the coroner. A prosecution was about to be taken in relation to the planning enforcement matters, but as given the tragic circumstances, that was put on hold while the death was investigated. Now, the council did, wearing its health and safety hat and wearing its authority, its regulatory hat, took steps to prosecute for that death. But that's not within this committee's jurisdiction. But it's just important background. And the company was pleaded guilty at the earliest opportunity. I only mention that in relation to the fine because credit was given in the fine of £80,000, and they were ordered to pay £30,000 of costs. So there is a regulatory background to this outside of the planning arena, But it is, I do see that members, inevitably there is, you'll seek to link that because of the circumstances of the tragedy. But the point is that the very substantial enforcement notice was taken, and I'd like to reassure members, and again, it's not a planning matter, that health and safety gave undertakings to the coroner and that they will be visiting the site within 4 weeks' time. Now, I can't give any more details in relation to that. And thereafter, health and safety will monitor this site and this operation, and they will base that on their own guidance. It's not within my knowledge, it's not within planning officer's knowledge. But rest assured that action, that it will be on the books. It's a business operating in the jurisdiction of health and safety. And health and safety, is a breaches are enforced. So you can be reassured in relation to planning enforcement, but also please be reassured in relation to health and safety, whilst of course it's a separate statutory regime. And that's the point that Adrian made earlier. So I just want to give that information because it's somewhat outside of the normal scope of things, but I think it's helpful in these particular circumstances.
Thank you, Katrina. Do you have anything to add at all?
No, I mean, the only thing I was just going to mention again is just the fact that because we have that extant enforcement notice, I do think that would give us the ability to almost skip out the step that was the most timely step in relation to some of the matters here if they came up again. So, for example, I could see if any of the inflatable activities or water park activities spread into the areas where they previously were, up to my orientation's gone because I can't see the north arrow, the west of the site, then I think they would already be covered by the extant enforcement notice which is in place. So we could simply jump straight to a prosecution or an order without having to go through that serving a new notice and waiting for the planning inspector to deal with an appeal if they exercise that right. So I do think we would be in a much better position if things went wrong again. Not that I can cover every potential future scenario, obviously, but hopefully that gives comfort.
That's about it. The last one, if we can give everybody.
It's the last one, sorry. I just think, and thank you for legal to clarify those points. I just think this whole thing helps us focus ourselves as panel members to our responsibilities, because our responsibilities are quite wide and these types of things can happen. Officers, because we can all see what's gone on, and applicants in regards to managing their sites properly once planning permission has been given. So I thank that for the opportunity, and thank you. I'll close my comments.
We were next to Councillor Lexton was next to speak.
Thank you, Chair. I had a couple of questions, the small ones. One is the parish council was one of the consultees, and they made a statement, but they didn't say why they object. That's one. There's no reason why they object, but they say they object. The other question I had was the flood grills. How high are these flood grills? The beach, does it get flooded when they have the floods? Because it's in a flood zone of 2 and 3. And the last question is, how often is this pit cleaned, or the maintenance of it, and what's the depth of it? Because I'm just asking for accidents, especially in the river Thames. They have lots of whatever is growing underneath, and you can get tangled if something happens, the boat or whatever. So this is why I'm asking, is it going to be regularly cleaned? I think that could be part of one of the condition, maybe, if you get put. I don't see any maintenance out of it. There isn't anything like that. That was my question. Thank you, Chair.
Can you answer that, Jo?
Yes, I can certainly come back on the first couple of points made. So the Datchet Parish Council comments say, as it stands, we would object to this application as there are still comments not returned from the borough and the statutory consultees. So these comments were dated the 15th of May 2024. So the reason the planning application has been in for such a long time is because we've had to go back and forth to consultees, primarily the Environment Agency, I think if you do look online, you'll see several comments from the Environment Agency, because they weren't happy initially with the flood risk assessment and the plans. And given the nature of the case, and I suppose the want to regularise the unauthorised use and development, we have given the applicant the opportunity to provide amendments and updates to the flooding information. So it's only just recently, and that's why the application is in front of us now at this time, that we've been able to resolve those issues, and we've got a no objection from the EA subject to condition. In terms of the flood grills, so the plans, I think some of the plans, yes, so the flood level is shown on the plan, so the grills have to go as high as the flood level. So in the time of the flood, the buildings will become floodable and the flood waters will flow through. And I think, I don't know if I said it in the presentation, but it's certainly it's within the report that whilst this is flood zone 3 that we're talking about, we are looking at water compatible uses and buildings. So again, that's why in this particular case they are considered acceptable. Oh, there's a comment about,
I think if I try and cover the water quality point, because I think that's one of the matters we probably can't deal with through planning. If we had evidence up before us that the water quality was fundamentally unacceptable and was never going to be acceptable for swimming in, for example, then I think that would be a planning matter that went to the heart of, can you grant permission for this use? If we're talking about testing, I think that is a health and safety matter and an operational matter, much like you would expect your swimming pool operator to regularly check the chlorine levels and the quality of the water in a swimming pool. That isn't because we're the planning authority puts a planning condition on telling them they had to do that. That's because it's a general requirement of running a facility and running it safely. Similarly, I live near Frensham Ponds, which is an open water swimming area, and they do water quality checks. And for quite a period each year, there's signs up saying, do not swim because there's blue-green algae here. But I think those are matters that are operational health and safety things. You would hope that there would be, as part of a risk assessment, appropriate testing and procedures in place for that. But I don't think they're matters we can control through the planning permission. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Chair. But what about the depth? Surely that comes under planning. You must be some certain kind of depth you're allowed to have those kind of facilities. I mean, an ocean there, just a river there, just example. I just wonder how deep it would be.
I think Councillor Luxon's planning on going swimming there needs to there.
I don't know the answer, and I don't think there are any specific rules around acceptable depths for swimming venues. I think it is much more to do with the procedures that are actually in place on the ground, much like when you go to the beach and things like that. It's about the number of lifeguards on duty compared to the number of people swimming, the advice and practices that they have in relation to how many children should be supervised or unsupervised. Like when I go to a swimming pool, I can only take 2 children with me. I can't take more than that. I think it's much more to do with those sorts of measures than the actual depth of the water.
Chair, thank you, Chair. It's just that Councillor Larkham mentioned that it's a gravel pit. It was a gravel pit, so it must be pretty deep or whatever. That's why I'm asking the question. So,
I think you've got to bear in mind we're not having planning permission for the holes in the ground full of water, are we? It's more the activity in the buildings. So you could say, couldn't you, I suppose, we can't look into it too much and part of the plan there. Councillor Tussey.
Thank you. Thanks. First of all, thank you to officers. Very good presentation. I think I've listened to I've listened to everyone so far. I've heard, and I'm really not convinced at the moment. I think that I have some serious concerns here. So I have a few questions which are all to do with safety, which I think this is to me this is the heart of it. I know 1024, the safety in children and public in relation to outdoor sports is a material planning consideration, and I could see, I mean, in MPPF, it's proportionate steps can be taken to reduce vulnerability, increase resilience, ensure public safety and security, the safety of children and other vulnerable users in proximity to open water should be considered in planning. So this is definitely a material planning consideration, and my understanding of that is it is irrespective and notwithstanding anything health and safety may decide, it is our duty to make sure that we are on balance satisfied that this is safe. Now, my first, literally within the last month, we've had the determination that Kyra Hill was not just unlawfully killed, but that there were gross breaches. And in terms of the timeline, I noticed that you mentioned a few things. There's a few things that have also happened. It looks like RBWM, you can't fault what we've tried to do. We have, but what's interesting is just a few weeks before the tragic event in August 2022, Liquid Leisure was accusing the council of being unreasonable and abusing its powers, and then they then, of course, the day after that they closed out of respect, but then just a couple of months later, we had to serve Liquid Leisure prohibition notice banning the park from opening, and I remember the attitude that we got from the owners then, that they were absolutely, that they were incandescent. In fact, they were supported by a couple of councillors, but that's neither here nor there. And it just seems to me that we have a long history of the owners here of ignoring the rules, and we just and an attitude of don't care. Even after this happened, they still didn't seem to care. And so that's my starting point. So here's a few questions. Number one, has there been a change of ownership? Because I don't think there has. Number two, yes, okay, well, so number two, with and thank you, Councillor Laxton, because I think you're right. In the coroner's report, it was noted that the diver said that there was almost zero visibility. Now, it was talked about perhaps because it's a gravel pit, because nothing was particularly done. There was also potentially the other uses of the other uses of that lake. Of course, part of the lake is used for water skiing. But so one question is, what have we done to ensure that we are satisfied that that there is, that the water quality is sufficiently good that if someone were to get into trouble again, that any dive would be able to see them very quickly, very easily? Because I haven't seen it. What's changed? That would be the question. Depth of water. It noted that there were very clear drops. Has that changed? Has anything changed in terms of, have they filled in part of the lake? Have they changed anything underwater? Emergency plan signs. Let's deal with those first questions, because I've got a few more actually. But,
yeah, that's fine. But
broadly speaking, the broad question is, how do we know
the same things?
Yeah, okay, but how do we know? I mean, we're saying, I just find it slightly, almost, it sounds like begrudgingly, well, is this site inherently more dangerous than others? Yes, it looks like it is. It looks like it is. And for all the reasons that the coroner noted. And what confidence can you give us as a panel that actually, oh no, we're wrong because here's what we've been seeing.
Sarah's points. I think they're all in there, aren't they? The points about safety, depth, and
Yeah,
maybe some of it's operational.
I mean, the first thing I'll just have to say again is dealing with the planning application. We have to be applicant blind. The applicant written down on the form is not Liquid Leisure, but who actually operates a site, who might get a lease in the future. So I do have to iterate that because it just sounds like the applicant is becoming a main consideration in people's minds, and we need to be really careful that that isn't the case. In terms of the physical things on site, there's nothing changed about the depth of the water. There's nothing in the planning application that would change the depth of the water or the material at the bottom of the water. The issues to do with the signage, I mean, we could deal with signage through a planning condition, but it's not the best way to deal with it, because through a planning condition, you deal with details once and that's it. And then if the nature of the operations on site day to day change, then that's not picked up by the planning condition. So that's why those are the sorts of matters that are better dealt with by health and safety. Obviously, there is nothing that has changed to do with the actual water or potential visibility of water. I don't think there is necessarily anything that can physically be done to change that. So the management of that risk, again, to my mind, would be down to a health and safety matter to do with number of lifeguards, adequate supervision of people using the facilities, etc. You would expect there to be appropriate signs in place, but as I've said, I don't think the planning system or planning conditions are the best or the right place to try and control that. And you would expect there to be appropriate emergency plans and risks assessments in place, but again, for the health and safety legislation, because planning, we only deal with things once and they can't be kept up to date. I don't know if Catriona has anything she'd like to add to that.
Thanks. Through you, Chair, just to add the and just for completeness, because I'm not deferring departing from what Adrian said about the applicant, but just for completeness, and again in this exceptional circumstances, that Liquid Leisure are not the owner of the site; they are the leaseholder. They're not the freehold owner. My understanding is from a land registry check, the applicant is the freehold owner of the site. And Liquid Leisure have a lease and it expires end of February next year. And that's just for context, as Councillor Tissey asked the question, but it's not directly linked, but I understand that why members would be interested in that. And just to back up just to add to what Adrian said about conditions, about all these items of concern, we don't want to butt up against the health and safety operation and condition in any way that would clash with the rules and the regulatory regime around this kind of facility that would be overseen by health and safety.
Could we, though? I mean, taking in mind the feeling that people are coming across here, 1024 does say at the bottom of this is considered the proposed uses and nature scale when considering the context of this planning guidance would not cause issues related to public safety, provided the correct precautions are carried out in the operation of the site as required by health and safety legislation. Could that not be conditioned for operation of the site? Because it says it in the report as a clear thing. So I was just wondering if that could be a way through this.
So I mean, the difficulty you get into is that the tests of a planning condition are quite clear, and one of them is about duplicating other legislation. So a planning condition shouldn't attempt to duplicate other legislation. And indeed, if it does, it can become ultra virus and unenforceable anyway. I mean, I do wonder if one thing that might be possible might help alleviate people's fears is we don't know precisely when site inspections happen under health and safety, and obviously that is for the health and safety team, but there are new facilities on the site that aren't operating at the moment that this permission would authorise to operate. So I do wonder if we could do a condition without tripping up on health and safety or out trying to duplicate things, simply to say that the uses permitted by this permission shouldn't take place until such a time as a health and safety inspection has been undertaken. So at least that would give the comfort that someone from the other regulatory team has visited and made an assessment before any of the new uses come into place, and that might give some comfort, hopefully.
Councillor Tissing?
Thank you. I suppose my sort of concerns on the, because to me this is the paramount thing. To me, I thought it was very, very useful you talking about the green belt, and because I had questions around that, and I think completely set, and likewise floodplain, again, those normally the big ones for most planning things, and actually very, very well. Also in even the habitat, so I had some questions, but to me that, sort of broadly at least satisfied if Natural England was satisfied. But the safety of children, the safety of you, that to me is the one thing that is a planning consideration, and I'm still not sure, could maybe say, actually, no, I'm going to recommend voting against officer recommendations on this one, but we're not there yet. No, I know.
Questions?
Can I just, so I think if we try and break it down, signs and plan and things like, insisting on health and safety, I think that insisting on a health and safety visit before anything happens, that to me, I think that is a good idea. So if we were minded to approve, then let's add a condition. That'd be my, let's add a condition there, maybe, but I know we're not there yet. I'm still not convinced though, because there's a couple of things that I'm not sure we can condition, and that make it inherently dangerous, at least on a balance of what we know so far. The depth of the water and the visibility of the water, which seems to be something that hasn't been dealt with and hasn't been bottomed out. Sorry if you pardon, but that worries me, and it would have been lovely if the applicant were here to explain how that had been met, but the applicant is not here. So unless anyone has anything, I'm not sure. Unless you can tell me, I don't think we can condition it out. To me, that's either an accept or reject position. But tell me if I'm wrong.
Do you want to leave that until we come to the debate, and then we can debate that point there, because I think we shall go back through itself. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to build upon this point around safety and water depth. I have some experience of open water swimming myself, the Thames, Bray Lake, and various other locations. Not actually this location. I'm somewhat concerned. So I understand the point about separating the structures and the operations, and I'm thinking again of the sort of the underwater profile, in terms of what is safe. So if you know that a piece of water is very deep, then the sort of the people who are allowed in it are a certain group of people who are used to deep water without being able to put their feet on the ground. If you have a piece of water which is advertised as shallow at a beach, that's quite different. So I'm wondering if we can sort of, if there is anything we can do from a planning perspective to look at this profile and sort of enforcing specifically safety around different depths of water. From a structural point of view. So, I mean, again, I don't want to get too operational, but it could be that where there is like a paddling pool or a sort of a safe, there's no safe depth, a depth where anybody could stand up in, that is fenced, and people who may be not confident swimmers would be allowed in there. And the open water swimming, which is talked about in the application, could be permitted elsewhere with the appropriate supervision. So focusing in on the structural bit of that, is there a structural condition we can apply that only certain, under this 1024, and with the safety concern, that there is restrictions as to what activities can happen where in the context of safety in the water.
Adrian?
I mean, I think the truth of the answer is not through the structure of a planning permission, because what we're kind of talking about there is, and I can say it from personal experience, you know, I mentioned Frensham Ponds before. The swimming area is demarcated by boys, and you're not allowed to swim beyond the swimming area because you may, in those circumstances, get hit by a boat or a wakeboard or the like. I suppose it's a similar issue with depth. You might want to see the area that's appropriate for swimming, have buoys around it. So it's, rather than just signage, you might want to see buoys around it so you know precisely what swimming area is safe. I think the difficulty for us is a lot of those things might change based on how you're using things. And there's quite a scope within the uses that you have to get planning permission for things to be laid out differently. So they are the kind of things that I would expect the health and safety side of things to pick up. And I just can't see a way to deal with them through a condition on the planning permission. But that's not to say they wouldn't be picked up.
So would something like insisting on depth markers at a point over a particular depth, like as in be inserted, is that planning because it's structural? Or
I think the real difficulty here is, I think the health and safety side of things needs a really bespoke assessment based on the actual operations that are being undertaken and the risks that are observed by the specialists. And I think it can go wrong. I mean, without wanting to go into too much detail, if one looks at the coroner's report, you will see that they had depth marking signs on because of a particular health and safety risk that had been identified. But the finding was that because those depth markings were there and there were no other depth markings, so there were shallow water markings because someone had identified the water was shallow and might get hurt, and then there were no corresponding deep water markings to say now it's changed to deep. I just think there's a level of detail and there's a level of detail of knowledge of what the actual operations are and what's actually going on site that needs to be risk assessed and dealt with, knowing the actual operations. And I just think it would be very difficult to deal with them through the planning. And I actually worry that we might put something on that might actually have the opposite effect to what we want, because we aren't the ones there going, this is precisely your operation, this is what you're doing, and this is the risk I think you need to deal with. But I would just be very cautious. I think it will be picked up through the inspections, but I don't think we in this room or my planning officers are the right people to be trying to do that.
I'm bearing in mind, in the back of my mind, this idea for a condition at a later point as a kind of a stopgap for everything and a point of reassurance, which I think we're all craving for, aren't we? To know it goes ahead safely. Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Chair. I think I might be able to help here because taking in most of the councillor's question, Councillor Tizzy and Councillor Wilson in particular, I think all of us are concerned about. Can I ask a question? Can we approve this without the aqua park included?
Sorry, demoting you. I'm not sure which. Adrian.
The answer would have to be no. As a local planning authority, we have to deal with the application before us, and we can't. The planning inspectorate can do split decisions, but local planning authorities can't. So we either have to grant the whole of the development before us, subject to conditions, or refuse the application. We don't have the opportunity to go, we like most of it, but we don't like this bit, I'm afraid.
Can I just add, just on a point of clarification, which is just for completeness, the tragedy did not occur from the activities on the inflatables. It was from the beach. So it was to that extent, it was unsupervised in the sense that it wasn't an activity on the inflatables. and there was a lifeguard on the beach. So it was just to be, as you mentioned, the aqua park and thinking about the structures. It's just for clarity in your considerations. Thank you, Chair.
I was just going to come back on regards, we can deal with the conditions later, because then that could cover that area.
Well, I think, has any other member, any other questions to put to the officers? Thank you very much for a fabulous, clear presentation, and we can have a restful moment now where we discuss the merits or therewithal. I'm willing to start on this because I did initially, when I saw this, I thought it was incredibly thick-skinned of the owner to put it through. But now understanding that it was a rolling process which has been going on regardless of what's happened, and probably delayed a bit because of the legal proceedings and inquest, I can see it coming through. It's in the green belt. It's less harm than building a block of flats on it, that's for sure, when you look at it plainly. And it's a well-loved activity, the water skiing and stuff there. And I suppose really the point that everybody made about it was a runaway train in the past, but we don't know that's going to happen in the future, do we? So we have to deal with what we know. So, you know, I would love, to be honest with you, just to be a planning process where we could decide we don't like something, because it would be really easy sometimes. And unfortunately, we're not allowed to do that. We have to look at what's laid in front of us. So to my mind, I hate to say, but we're reluctant support for the application, the officer's recommendation, as far as I'm feeling it at the moment. So unusually for the chair to start, would anybody else like to speak? Councillor Davis.
Yeah, it is one of those, well, we're going to find it difficult to put into words or reason for refusal unless we can see into the future. Speaking of cost in terms of safety, I'm slightly reassured about the reduction in size of the inflatable area. It seems like for downscaling, so we can keep an eye on things more. I wish you could enforce things like inflatable life jackets has to be worn when on the parks, or attachable float when swimming, because the depth is not depth, the visibility. If someone sinks, doesn't matter if you dive straight away, you're not going to find them without a float or something like that. But that isn't something for us to enforce. That's for health and safety regulations. I'm also partially reassured by planning officers saying we have more robust enforcement capabilities. So yeah, there's also matters to consider, like impact on greenbelt, biodiversity, things like that. Planning team have already bid about that and covered things I would never have thought of. So I'm reassured, all those things. It's just for safety. And without being able to see into the future, we can put into words a reason for refusal. So I think it's one of those that we have to reluctantly accept.
That's a Mark Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. So I would like to formally propose this condition around that effectively the site can't be used or open to the public before a full health and safety inspection has been carried out and has been passed, or has received, and that the operator has received a fully clean report from health and safety. I think, yeah, from a planning point of view, excluding safety, it does seem to tick all the boxes. The safety is clearly the massive concern, and the sort of we talked about all the operational things. I think it's absolutely critical that you know, the safest possible environment is created here going forwards. So depending on exactly how we word that condition, but I think that condition requiring the full health and safety inspection being passed before anybody uses it is critical.
We kind of need a proposal to follow the recommendation to add the condition. Then, if you're proposing to accept officer's recommendation and add, then give us a way forward.
Yeah, so now I'm happy to propose to accept officer's recommendation with that extra condition around the health and safety.
The wording of the condition, I believe, was that none of the operators is to be used until health and safety inspection has been carried out. Would that be correct?
That was my thinking, and the trigger point would have to be we have to be careful around the trigger point, because obviously there are authorised uses on the site at the moment, so it would have to be prior to the commencement of any of the uses permitted by this permission. There is an aspect of me that wonders if the appropriate thing to do, because there is an overlap in legislation and we want to get it right, would be we take the principle of the condition, but the detailed wording of the condition we take away for myself to talk to the other teams involved and then agree the wording of the condition outside of the meeting with the chair, because I think we want to get it right. Trying to word it tonight might be difficult, and it might be better to say for the head of planning to agree the wording in collaboration with the chair after the meeting.
But it can be along those lines, the exact wording to be agreed, but the condition to be agreed on.
The sentiment should hopefully be clear. Yeah.
Councillor Buckley?
I'm happy to second that.
Thank you very much. Any more points to debate? I know Councillor Tizzy was on the fence before.
The first thing I'd say in relation to that condition is that I would agree with it, but if we are going to approve this, then I would agree that is an absolutely necessary condition, and I think it's a very pragmatic way of doing it. I'm still not convinced, though, that that's going to be enough, because I think that there are a couple of things that I'm still not sure about, and in particular around the visibility, which does appear from what we know, and from what the coroner's decision was, that may be specific to this site. I wish we'd had the applicant here to explain why that's not an issue and why actually we can go ahead with this, but I don't think we can condition that out. And with that in mind, I would like to propose that in line with the on the grounds of safety to children and the public, and the lack of confidence in that, in the light of what we know in regarding recent judgments, and in particular around visibility, around depth of water, around signs and emergency planning, that given the grave nature of what we know, that on those grounds of public safety, that we reject this application going against officer recommendation. And that's my proposal, I would propose that we go against officer recommendation and reject this proposal on safety grounds.
Okay. Do we have a seconder for that proposal? No. Has anything to add to the debate at all before we go? Councillor Lexter.
I just wondered if that, I know you're going to put the wording together. You just wondered if it's possible, just that one word that Councillor Teasy wants it, if it's possible to consider it, so it goes all in one condition. I'm just suggesting it rather than have another proposal for refusal. The word is talking about the clear water depths.
But how could you?
I'd love to. That's a debatable point. We have the propositions, the opposing propositions. One has a seconder and one doesn't. And if we've boxed that off now, I think if we all agree, we should go to a vote then in that case. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just wanted to comment really on Councillor Teasy's comment around the lack of clarity of the water. For me, so that needs to be taken into account in the health and safety inspection fully, so that without getting too operational or too specific, I would expect that if the water is very cloudy, that sufficient health and safety measures are taken, that people only swim in it, as Councillor Davis said, like with the toe float and with the appropriate experience, and that anybody sort of on the beach effectively playing with the water is, well, I don't know, over to health and safety, but I'm kind of assuming that health and safety, or for me it's a requirement, I'm assuming health and safety will factor in the state of the water. And I guess we can't ask that question, but I guess they must do. I would think that, I don't know whether we can Yeah, they have to, I think they have to do that.
I think like any open water place, it's very hard to regulate the quality and the visibility in the water. It depends on the activity and everything else. There'll be nothing wrong, I don't think, in the committee deciding that we should write to the health and safety people with our concerns about the visibility and ask them to consider it at a later time when they look at it, because it's not something we could consider here. But I think we're all concerned about it. You know, it is a factor. Would that be accessible, Katrina?
I mean, I think that's absolutely fine, and we can pass on the concern and actually ask them to watch the video of the meeting, and we could note the concern in the minutes and as well. That's helpful.
I think it'd be worth putting together a letter as well, and it makes it a little bit more formal. You know, that our concerns about that thing. With that as an idea going forward, Councillor Tizzy, are you happy to withdraw that?
Well, I haven't been seconded yet, so this might be a moot point anyway, but I think there's two separate things. On the one hand, if we are going to approve this, I completely think that we need a robust additional condition regarding health and safety that they have somehow completed and been satisfied, but the wording to be determined by officers. And yes, it would be good for them to look at our concerns here, because these are serious concerns. So that's if it does go. At this point, I'm not prepared still to change my mind, but as I said, it might be a moot point if I'm not being seconded anyway. So thank you.
I think we're covering as much of the concerns that people have as much as can, and I fully intend when the wording is brought to myself to share it with everybody else as well via team, so we can all know I'm not doing a deal behind people's backs on this. So we have at this point, sorry.
I think it's been done.
So if we have finished the debate here, we have one proposition, which is to approve in accordance with officers' recommendations, with a condition being applied at a later date around health and safety inspection prior to the use of the site and the new condition, however that is worded, to be agreed in future, with a note to be taken and a letter to be written about the health and safety concerns over water visibility in the lake. We have a seconder, Councillor Buckley. Councillor Wilson is the proposer. Can we go to a name vote, please?
Yes, Chair, of course. So as you said, we have a motion proposed by Councillor Wilson and seconded by Councillor Buckley to grant planning permission on the satisfactory completion of an undertaking to secure a legal agreement to offset carbon contributions with the with the conditions listed in section 14 of the report. And this is in addition to a condition proposed by Councillor Wilson requiring a health and safety inspection to be carried out in advance of any of the new uses commencing, the wording of which shall be agreed with the chair and the head of planning following tonight's meeting, and along with the letter that you mentioned as well. Is everyone happy with that? Okay, with that, I can go to a named vote. Councillor Buckley.
For.
Councillor Devon Davis.
For.
Councillor Karen Davis.
Just because the officers, it's better to regulate the planning situation than to have it unregulated. And planners have secured some excellent conditions with regard to biodiversity and energy and lighting and those measures purely because of that. For
Thank you. Councillor Knowles.
Well,
Councillor Luxton.
well,
Councillor Teasy. Councillor Wilson.
Or
That's 6 for, 1 against. The motion is carried.
Thank you very much, everybody, for complicated subject in itself. We move now to agenda item 5, which has been withdrawn. So we now skip merrily on to agenda item number 6, 25/00373, full application, land fronting the north bank of the Thames and access between 66 and 68 Wraysbury Road in Staines. Proposal is to propose replacement of the original dwelling, Horton House. Brownie, I believe. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. So first of all, with an introduction and background, the proposal is identical to the application refused at Planning Committee last year. The covering letter and supporting information provided by the applicant seeks to defend and rebut the reasons for refusal, but doesn't offer any new technical information to address the reasons for refusal. In officer's opinion, the proposal is not a replacement dwelling, as there is no dwelling currently residing on the application site, nor has there been, and the site is not in residential use. A former dwelling, Cotam, was demolished in 1959, but was sited in a different location, some 200 metres from the application site. The proposal is fundamentally unacceptable in terms of Greenbelt policy. No very special circumstances exist. The site lies within Flood Zone 3B, which is the functional floodplain, where there is an in-principle objection to residential development. The Environment Agency have objected to the application. The site lies within ancient woodland. A woodland tree preservation order was served in 2024, and there is an in-principle objection to erecting a dwelling in ancient woodland in the absence of any technical supporting information in this regard. There are very strong reasons for refusal to which substantial weight must be attributed, and the tilted balance is not engaged in this case. As before, insufficient information has been provided in relation to trees, ecology, biodiversity and sustainability. There is a committee update which has been circulated this afternoon, which outlines further representations which have been received since the publication of the main report, and recommends an update to reason for refusal 4 concerning trees and ancient woodland. So the recommendation is to refuse planning permission for the following reasons: inappropriate development in the Greenbelt, inappropriate development and use within the functional floodplain, ecological harm and failure to demonstrate BNG, impact on trees and ancient woodland, impact on the setting of the River Thames and the character and appearance of the site and locality, and failure to provide an energy statement and to meet the requirements of the Sustainability SPD. This slide shows the location plan. The site lies on the northern bank of the River Thames in Wraysbury and to the east of the M25 A30 bridge over the river. The site is accessed from Wraysbury Road to the north via a long narrow driveway, and the site lies to the southwest of Queensmead Lake. So in terms of the site constraints, the site lies within the Greenbelt. It lies within Flood Zone 3B, which is the functional floodplain. The site is designated as ancient woodland and the trees are covered by a woodland tree preservation order. The site also lies within the setting of the River Thames. This is an aerial photo of the site. So the original dwelling, known as Cotan House, was compulsory purchased in the 1950s. And that was to make way for the construction of the A30 Runnymede Road bridge, which was constructed across the river. It's shown on the left-hand side of the aerial photo. The proposal is to construct a new dwelling on a different site, approximately 200 metres southeast of the former dwelling house and within the woodland area there next to the river. This photograph has been submitted with the application, and it's a photograph of Cotan House prior to its demolition in 1959. So this is a photograph of the proposed site. So it is within a clearing within the trees in the woodland, and you can see the A30 road just beyond, and the river adjacent. So this historic map, this was provided with the application and shows the original Cotan House siting. So this was prior to the construction of the A30 road. Again, it shows the differing locations of the former dwelling house and now the application site where the new dwelling is proposed. This is a more detailed site plan showing the outline of the proposed dwelling house. Again, within the wooded area, and you can see the road on the left-hand side and the river at the bottom of the plan there. So these are the floor plans that have been submitted with the application, ground floor and first floor. These are the elevations, front elevation and rear elevation. So the plans do indicate traditional design with flood grills, given the site's location in the flood zone. And again, the side elevations of the dwelling house, and then on the right hand side, that's a photo that's been submitted as an example of some ground screw piles to lift the dwelling house out of the ground. These photographs have been provided by the applicant, considered it worthwhile showing to members this evening. They were taken on the 22nd of May 2025, so showing the open grassland area where the dwelling house is proposed to be constructed. These are views of the site taken from the opposite side of the river, again taken this year in April, sort of showing the character of the site and the area, the River Thames setting. These photographs show views looking up and down the river, again from the opposite side of the riverbank. And these photographs show views of the motorway bridge spanning the River Thames. So in terms of the planning balance, officers have set out that there are some limited benefits of the application. There's the provision of one new dwelling house, and there would be some limited economic benefits through the construction of that dwelling house. On the opposite side of the balance, the harms comprise of the inappropriate development in the green belt, provision of a new dwelling house in the functional floodplain, where we've got an in principle objection from the Environment Agency, the loss of ancient woodland and lack of arboricultural information, ecological harm and lack of surveys, impact on the River Thames setting, and failure to provide an energy statement and carbon offset contribution. So in terms of the conclusion and recommendation, this is a flat balance that needs to be made in this case. So paragraph 11D of the NPPF requires planning permission to be granted unless the application of policies in the framework that protect areas or assets of particular importance provides a strong reason for refusing the proposed development. So in this case, the application of policies within the framework that protect the green belt, protect areas of flood risk, and protect irreplaceable habitats, so ancient woodland, they provide a strong reason for refusing the development. So because of that, the planning balance is therefore a flat balance where the benefits are weighed against the harms. When weighing the very limited benefits against the harms arising from the development which are afforded substantial weight, the harms cannot be outweighed. Therefore, the application is recommended for refusal in line with paragraph 11D1 of the NPPF. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Joe. We have two speakers on the subject. First, the applicant, Mr. John Watson. John, if you'd like to take the chair. hit of the button when you wish to speak, 3 minutes to speak, and Kim will give you a 1 minute warning towards the end. As soon as you're ready and wish to speak, then press the button and off you go.
So I am John Watson, the applicant of this resubmission. I know from my previous application you're aware of the very rich history of Cotan. What you will not have been privileged to make is a visit to the site, and so I took the liberty of emailing you all yesterday photographic evidence of the island. And these photographs were taken just a couple of weeks ago, when we not only cleared the detritus that had accumulated, but also mowed the area where the proposed building is to be sited. It is apparent there is no need to remove any trees for this purpose. I've also received, of course, from the previous owners of the dwelling some quite incredible information on pictures and so on, but also insight into the history and the makeup of the property. The house, built in Japanese style, was such an important piece of architectural design, and it is difficult to understand why it wasn't simply moved a short distance within its own grounds when the land was acquired by compulsory purchase to build the A30 bridge. Cotan sat on hardwood stilts, not therefore an impossible task to actually move it. At the time, single dwellings were not eligible for historical listings, which of course is a shame. Had the compulsory purchase taken place several years later, it might well have been a very different story. Anyway, the application takes into account the fact that it sits, like a large number of other riverside homes in the borough, on the functional floodplain. And special consideration has been given to this by the use of radix piles, an innovative method of raising the house above any projected increase in flood risk levels. It is a facility adopted by other Thameside homes. It is hoped that the fabricated house would be manufactured in the UK while looking identical to the original in every way, but using modern materials and aiming to make it carbon neutral. I'm encouraged by the fact that there's been no objections to this project from nearly all local people that I'm aware of. Indeed, there has been support for the application, the parish council, for example. I am obviously keen to pursue this opportunity. I'm really hoping for a positive outcome this evening. I've already begged 2 time extensions to the agreement with the vendor, and if necessary, a further extension I'm sure will prove interesting. I'm hoping that the panel tonight will see the merits of voting to approve the application of this, a family home. It clearly provides a long-term beneficial use for this otherwise derelict, and I have to say, dumping ground. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. If we can ask our next speaker, is the local councillor for the area, the application's in, Councillor Ewan Larkham. I think you know the brief.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Ewan Larkham. After 20 years of living in Wraysbury, I've lived in Datchet since '77, been a member of Datchet Parish Council almost continuously since 1986. Today I'm also on Horton and Wraysbury Parish Councils. I'm now in my 11th year on Wraysbury Parish Council and my 7th year as RBWM Datchet, Horton and Wraysbury Ward Councillor. I speak in support of this application to recreate Cotan House on the banks of the River Thames. I called in this application because this is not merely another development proposal. It represents a unique opportunity to restore an important piece of our local heritage that was lost to progress over 65 years ago. I understand that the original Cotan house, built around 1860 as a Japanese-style summer retreat, was one of the most historically significant Thameside properties of its era. It entertained distinguished guests, including Field Marshal Haig, and was compulsorily purchased and demolished in 1959 for the A30 bridge construction, a decision that removed a treasured architectural gem from our riverside heritage. The proposal before you offers careful replication based on original scale drawings and photographs. This isn't speculative development, but thoughtful heritage restoration that would return cultural significance to a site that has remained undeveloped for decades. Regarding greenbelt concerns, this location is adjacent to the M25 and A30, with some 200,000 vehicle movements per day. The surrounding areas already accommodate substantial and ever-increasing industrial development, including haulage operations. The proposed dwelling would have limited impact.
1 minute remaining.
It's set back 31 metres from the riverbank, screened by mature trees and designed sensitively at an appropriate scale. The site currently attracts fly tipping and antisocial behaviour, and my view is that residential occupation here would provide natural surveillance and long-term stewardship. On flood risk, the appellant has designed an elevated structure on stilts specifically to address these concerns. Modern engineering solutions can now deliver flood-resilient development in an area where historic buildings once stood successfully for nearly a century. The ecological and arboricultural reports can be secured by condition if members are minded to approve. The applicant has demonstrated commitment to environmental responsibility through proposed solar technology, ground source heating, and long-term tree management, addressing current neglect of this ancient woodland site. Most importantly, this represents a once-in-a-generation opportunity to restore something precious that was lost. The careful recreation of Cotown House would be a positive legacy, returning architectural heritage to the Thames corridor while providing exemplary stewardship of this sensitive riverside location.
That's the time, Councillor Larkham. Thank you. That's the time.
Councillor Larkham, we gave you a bit more extras, so yeah,
Sorry,
you had a bit of extra portion. Thank you very much. There's points from both those presentations that probably worth just addressing at the start. One thing you'll find is just about a year ago, we had the same application here, and there was a very long debate about whether you could replace a house knocked down 65 years ago with another house now, just out of the way from it, no matter how much it looked like it. So it's worth remembering that point going forward, because I think we could save ourselves a bit of time tonight on that. I must ask, from last year's application to this, Joe, are there any material differences between the two?
In terms of the application submissions and the technical documents and the plans, no. I did say in the presentation there have been, so the sort of the covering letter and supporting statement from the application perhaps adds a bit more information and emphasis and argument behind the proposal. Why, in the applicant's view, it is considered acceptable. And also it's on public access, and perhaps discusses a bit of the process undertaken by himself between the refusal and now. That I think there was tried to engage with officers, and we had to give some advice about, you know, the fundamental reasons for refusal in this case. It's not really something that can be overcome through engagement and pre-application advice. The applicant was advised to appeal. They were out of time to appeal, so they have to come back in and make an application. So that's all explained. But in terms of the plans, technical information in the submissions, no. I should just say though, what is different in terms of information to us as a local authority is that we did serve the woodland tree preservation order last year, and that wasn't in the previous committee report or before members at the time of the last decision. And that just really sort of it emphasises the fact that the site is in ancient woodland, which again is, as well as flooding and greenbelt, it's quite a high bar to get round in terms of new development. So that in terms of your planning considerations, that's probably the only thing that's changed. Oh, one other thing, the MPPF has introduced grey belt. We've again covered that off in the report. We don't consider this site is grey belt.
Thank you. I thought it was just worth getting that into context with us if people were here or not during last year's meeting. Councillor David Beckley.
Thank you, Chair. I obviously wasn't here at that last meeting, so thank you for the quick briefing on there. Could I ask just to go back over some of the slides? Is that okay? During the presentation, there was a couple of points. One was showing the buildings in a picture of a similar type building on stilts. Isn't this site, but it showed another site on there. I think it's about halfway through the presentation. The Japanese buildings inside trees, and it looked like historic woodlands, etc. And these buildings were on trees and around trees without disturbing the woodland. I'd like to come to that one. Yeah. So just looking at that, obviously that's in principle, those buildings have been built without any harm or adjacent to what would deem to me a significant historic woodland. So that and this is where the proposal is being done on those stilts. Is that correct? In the same sort of condition?
Yeah.
So the photograph is a photograph that we believe was submitted in the design and access statement and is an example.
Yes.
So it's not in the plan.
Example
so
what can be done.
Yes, we don't know where it's from, what the site is. We don't know what the impacts are. I think the example is used to show that the site, a dwelling house could be raised up on screw piles. So
I'm using it to look at the woodland and,
okay,
and that type of
right,
thing.
yeah.
So I get the point with the flooding and the stilts. I'm looking at how that's been dealt with, and obviously the applicant is looking at to, look at this and build this within the woodland rather than take away any woodland. So I understand. Is that correct for what I just said?
It's correct insofar that, well, the applicant is stating that they're not proposing any tree removal, although there has been some clearance of the site. I don't think what we don't have is any technical information about what has been removed, what is to be retained, and how the siting of the building would impact those trees, vegetation to be retained, and also the designation of the site as ancient woodland. It's more than the trees itself. It's anything that covers the ground.
But we don't know what's been removed. They may not have removed any trees either. Is that?
We don't know. I think it's sort of a lack of information point.
Okay, thank you. So another picture I wanted to bring up as well. Sorry, I'm asking all these questions. Another picture was. Sorry, Joe. If the other picture was, you showed some riverbanks and sightings across the Thames, etc. If you could just flick to those for me. That one there. That's it. Okay. Yeah. Perfect. Okay. So that in the water there looks like to me is a derelict boat and the dumping ground, which we've all experienced on Maidenhead passes and all things like this. And Councillor Larkin mentioned about being taken care of. This site is a dumping ground in the local area, as they've said, and as we're seeing here on the pictures. So obviously there is a great benefit to have someone there looking after the site rather than it being left to its own devices and running into fly tipping, etc. In this case, it will be an EA requirement to remove that boat. But I look at it and I say, well, I'm seeing fly tipping in one shape or another in there. So I've got a couple of main questions. Obviously, in regards to inappropriate development on Greenbelt, obviously, and going back, if you could bring up your chart with harms and benefits, if you wouldn't mind, that's it, great. So, and I've taken on the point that this has been before the panel before, so I'm trying to keep this very short and sweet. But so the original building was built in 1860. It was demolished under a CPO in 1959, compulsory purchase order. This current building is on the same site but 200 metres to the right. Is that correct? Or are you saying it's a totally different site? Okay, and how's that decided on a totally different site? Is there a boundary or different property or?
The information we have available to us just indicates they are separate sites. One's one side of the or underneath the road. As it is now.
It would be, yeah. But it would have been one site at one point, but it's been separated by the road.
I think the information we have is that we don't know they're of the same site. The applicants.
We don't know anything.
There was a very, very long debate in that meeting about whether you could
say
it was a replacement up to
I've got
65 years, and I think.
what I'm saying about significant
Yeah.
harm to the green belt
Yeah.
is, I get the point about whether it could be replaced, but is it significant harm to the green belt in building another building on the green belt, which was the original building was on the green belt there anyway? So I would argue that there isn't significant harm to the green belt in this particular application, but I also coming on to trees, etc. So if that was flipped on your, going back to your chart of benefits and harm, if the green belt was flipped the other way onto the benefits or taken out the harm, would that outweigh?
So it would just be, if you felt as a decision maker, there was no harm to the green belt because it was an appropriate development in the green belt, that would be a neutral.
I'm having difficulty to see why there is a harm when there was one there in the green belt before, even though I accept it's been moved and I accept it 65 years later. I just.
So when we're looking at new development in the green belt, we have to be guided by policy and guided by the framework. The framework at paragraph 154 sets out a list of what we are able to consider as decision makers to be appropriate development in the green belt.
Yeah.
A new dwelling in the green belt is not considered as an appropriate form of development.
And you've covered that under the previous one.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
It went through a lot.
Yeah, I'm trying to keep it simple, but not being party to that. I'm trying to cover some of the ground that I would have covered if I was there. And unfortunately, I wasn't.
To add to that, and it's covered in the report, and I think was covered last committee meeting, there is case law, there is appeal decisions when a building has been demolished, and so for argument's sake, say it was on the same site, been demolished, and that use has been abandoned, that does fall away. So we've got case law, we've got appeal decisions that help us interpret that exception of the NPPF, which talks about replacement buildings. So for it to be a replacement, it has to be.
Yeah, I'm not looking at it as being a replacement building. I'm looking at it as harm on the green belt.
Okay, so you are looking at a new.
I'm looking at it as a new build, but I'm trying to weigh up the significant harm to the green belt by this property coming here now, and I can't see the differential from what you're telling me.
So it's harmful by definition. It's defined
because
in policy. It's defined in policy that a new building in the green belt is inappropriate unless it's one of the exceptions. It's not one of the exceptions, so we have to, as a decision maker, say it's inappropriate and harmful.
That's fine.
Can we move it? Because
okay, come back.
We'll come back to
a
you in a
couple
minute.
of questions.
So, who was next? I believe it was no, Councillor Devon Davis. You're catching my eye. Keep me aware. I wish you had something else.
So I really like the aesthetics of the design. Should that be part of my planning balance?
It could be something that you attribute some weight to. I think you've got to look at what we've got listed here in terms of benefits and harms. In terms of the harms, the NPPF sets out what weight we should be giving to some of those harms. So in terms of inappropriate development, it is substantial in terms of flood risk as well. So if you were to attribute some benefit to the visual appearance, I mean, given the weight, the weightiness of those harms, in my advice to you would be it would not outweigh those harms.
More of a legal question. It seems like the NPPF is pretty clear on how we should decide this. What would be the repercussions if we just ignored it and voted to approve?
I think, really, I mean, that's a question for the debate later. I think really, you've got a fundamental problem with going against something in the green belt, but
I mean, I think I probably have to answer because we're a quasi-judicial planning committee, or you as members are sitting tonight. So the first part of planning law is that you're required to determine development having regard to development plan and planning policy and other material considerations. So just for the sake of the debate and for the sake of clarity, based on the way that was phrased, I'd have to advise you that legally we can't ignore the NPPF. We have to take it into account.
It comes down to, if not liking something or liking something was a planning reason, I think we'd all have an easier life.
I asked some of other people. Yeah.
Any more questions for panel members? Back to David, okay, Councillor David Buckley.
I'm just going back to the EA objection. So obviously they've been clear they've put an objection in. Is there any mitigating conditions we could put in? How severe is the objection? I've tried to go through the documents quickly just to refresh myself. I have read it, but is there something we can do on that?
Yeah, so I was going to bring this up actually when we're talking about flood risk and new development in the floodplain. So I think there's been a lot of talk about mitigation, so raising the dwelling up on stilts or using voids. It's more than that in this case. So the objection from the Environment Agency, and I'll just read out the first bit. We object to the proposed development as it falls within a flood risk vulnerability category that is inappropriate to the flood zone in which the application site is located. So it's not just the building, it's the use. It's proposing a use of a high vulnerability category into the functional floodplain. So it doesn't matter if the building can flood or not. And in any case, the EA don't accept mitigation through voids in flood zone 3 and 3B. It's just not an exceptional use in that location, because you're putting people's lives at risk by siting a home in the flood zone.
Coming back on that, I think that may be something that's changed since the building was originally built 1860 to 1959, because it obviously was sat there okay for many years. No one had that when it was first built. So this is something that's come up since then, is it?
I mean, I'd say planning policy on flooding has probably changed a lot, and the flood zones obviously change a lot over time as well with climate change, etc. The EA update the flood maps regularly. So, you know, it could well be when the original dwelling was built in 1969 in a slightly different location, flooding may not have been a consideration in the planning system for it at all, but it is for us tonight on this one.
Okay. And then you mentioned about the other harm was the contribution or offset, wasn't it, in regards to, I can't remember what it's the last one on the, if you just take us through that, please.
Yeah, so all applications, do you want me to share?
If you look at the slide with benefits and harms, yeah, I think that covers most of my points.
So so the last point there, that's the last reason for refusal. So applications for new development and new residential development in the borough are required to submit an energy and sustainability statement. We've got a sustainability SPD now, so we would need that information to show how the energy performs in terms of its carbon usage, and we don't have that information. Even if we were to have that information, we would look at calculations. We would consult with our sustainability officer. Normally there's a carbon.
We haven't got that, but the presentation from the applicant stated that it was being used in a specific way, and obviously I would presume it would have a benefit in regards to their energy, but they haven't submitted to you, so you can't have comment on it.
So it's perhaps an intention, but it's details that we don't have.
Okay. So could we, for instance, give them time or put a condition in to allow them time to present that at this stage or not?
No, so we have to assess the application that's in front of us.
Okay. We can off mic there if we've finished. Do we have any more questions to put to the officers? Councillor Buckley, if you can make your letter say. If we have no more to put to the officers, I think we can move to the debate part. Do you have a question?
No,
debate. Okay. So, Councillor Chisholm, we'll start the debate in a minute. After I thank the officers again for a good presentation there. Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you. I think it was really interesting. It was I was trying to rack my brains about, oh, hang on, what did we decide? How did we? And it all came flooding back as again. But it was I do remember this, and I love that slide, by the way. I like the idea of that slide on any application. Almost in my head I'm trying to do it as well, and I'm going to be slightly generous here. If I think that if in addition to what's there as well, there's arguably some weight to the history, so for the look and feel, it does feel like that there is a genuine passion here to recreate something that was lovely at one point and has a history, and potentially I think the fact that it's secure, screened by mature trees, potentially maybe on the setting of the Thames, that's sort of, to me, that's in the middle, because there's a positive and a negative, but I'm being generous here. The right hand side, however, I just can't get away from, because I think we have there's the green belt, and it was really useful. Thank you, officers, to clarify that this is a flat judgment, not a tilted balance judgment. There's the flood zone 3 and the EA objection, and that's, I mean, well, you can see clearly where it is, and that's going to be a difficult one. I did have a question, but again, you've answered it, about the woodland versus the fact, well, hang on, it's actually in a clearing, but I understand that still does apply. So there's the ancient woodlands, there's the ecological harm, and I would add another one onto the right-hand side, which is consistency. It sounds like very little has actually changed since the last time we looked at this, a year or wherever it was ago. And I think we have to be consistent unless we can find new reasons, unless the law has changed, which is why questions about tilted balance, for example, are appropriate. I just, there's far too much on the right, even if we're being generous on the left. So with all of that in mind, let's just go straight to it. I'd like to propose that we go with officer recommendations and refuse this application.
Thank you, Councillor Tizzy. It's kind of a little bit of stuff in here, but I do find as these rules change, I do find it strange that an area of ancient woodland, maybe right next to a massive motorway bridge, is not classed as grey belt. There is some element of madness with this, which I think, I have a funny idea as these rules change, that problem might change in the future, because you're pretty brave to want to build a house next to such a noisy thing the whole time. But like you, as much as you like the idea of something or the design, it doesn't outweigh the fact that on the harms, they are just stacked up against it under the current legislation and where the legislation sits. And equally, I bear in mind that if we did go against that recommendation, we would and approve the building on Greenbelt, that it would have to go to the inspector anyways, Greenbelt application approval. So it's kind of a hiding to nothing, really, as far as I can see it. It's kind of thing I would love to see happen, but the rules don't allow it to happen. So I'm fully supporting the officer's recommendations. Anybody else like to add to that or to second? Councillor Lexton.
Just a question, actually. On the last report, we didn't have anything of archaeological findings. The site on the site, but it is on this time. That is definitely, I haven't seen that previously, or maybe I missed it. 1043. And
so Berkshire Archaeology, so they commented on the application. So they would look at the weekly list of planning applications. They would sift through the applications to see which ones are in archaeological sensitive areas or have implications, and they would comment. I can't comment on why they didn't comment previously, but they have done in this case. Normally, issues they raise can be addressed by condition. So I don't think that has much bearing on the decision.
Okay, just wondering whether that carry weight because it's an archaeological. And also, does Constitution, the Council Constitution, go back so many years where you can build being a heritage property in the past? I know there's all the new rules and we've just been through it a couple of times. Does it really come into consideration for any listed buildings and all of the where they're ruined and you can build all of it on the same footprint? Can you do that? Sorry, it's a bit complicated the way I'm asking the question.
So you mentioned the council's constitution.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be any. There's no such rule, but it wouldn't be in the constitution in any event. That's more the rule book for the business of the council.
I'm talking about the 1800s, where they would continue to be in the constitution.
Well, there is no building there. The building has gone, it was demolished. So.
Okay, that's my clarification.
It's something we covered. I don't think you
Yeah.
read that last one. So it's very long and
I
exhaustive.
know. I just wanted to ask the two questions. Thanks.
Do we have a seconder for the motion to reject second? You second or speaking? Sorry? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. This is a tricky one. I think that the slide, the planning balance slide is quite helpful. The green belt debate for me, I mean, we had 10 years ago large swathes of green belt between Windsor and Maidenhead and around the borough, and they've gone just like that. This is a small patch of land. It's on one hand it's ancient woodland, and on the other hand it's a dumping ground full of rubbish. Is it a protected woodland or is it a refuse tip? For antisocial behaviour, I don't know. I get the book view of the green belt, but the common sense view of the green belt is, well, this is sort of, it might be now, but it might not be at the next BLP. Who knows? They probably wouldn't look at this site because it's too small. But if they were to look at this site, don't know. Floodplain. I looked at the RBWM flood report from Storm Henk, January 24. This didn't flood. A lot of the borough did. Cookham, Old Windsor. This didn't. So it's not that fun.
second one, which we must address, I think, really, because it is it's the implications and the reasoning you have to put in to basically approve a building in the greenbelt against all the rules to build it in the greenbelt. If I don't know if Aidan would like to expand on that.
I mean, I'll just come in on. I will say, if I look at the harms column, and this is me trying to be helpful, I think there's 3 at the end which are potentially information ones, or judgment ones. So impact on the River Thames setting, riparian character, that is a judgment point. I think people could legitimately have a judgment either way on it. Failure to provide an energy statement and ecological harm surveys, we don't have the information, so we don't know. They could be a positive, they could be a benefit, but we don't have the information. The other 3, I would say, are fairly fundamental ones. So the greenbelt harm is a harm by definition under the legislation. It's not necessarily about whether there's the extent of harm to openness. There is by definition a harm there that we have to take into account. So what one can't properly, considering an application against the planning policy, flip that to a benefit, if that makes sense, because legislation says by definition it must be a harm, and to outweigh that harm you would need very special circumstances that outweigh the harm. The provision of a new dwelling house in the functional floodplain, again, that is an in principle objection, and it's an in principle objection for a couple of reasons. One, because a new dwelling in the functional floodplain increases the risk of flooding elsewhere. Obviously, there are mitigations that can reduce the extent to which it does, but in principle it does. And also it places additional residents in a position that they are vulnerable, they may need rescuing, or they may be at risk in a flood event. In terms of whether it flooded in a particular flood event, those flood risk areas are calculated on the basis that flood zone 3 is generally a risk of 1 in 20 or higher. Functional floodplain is designed to flood. It doesn't necessarily mean it will flood in every single flood event, or that the fact that it didn't flood in a flood event means it never will. It's just it's classified as a risk of flooding in a given year. And then the loss or harm to ancient woodland. So ancient woodlands are areas that have been continuously wooded for a significant period. I won't try and say the date off of the top of my head because I won't remember it properly, but they've been wooded for a considerable amount of time, and therefore they're considered effectively irreplaceable habitats that are meant to be given the highest level of protection. The way you generally seek to protect them in planning policy terms and in line with guidance is that you have a buffer zone of 15 metres and you don't build anything within it. And anything within it is generally considered to give harm to the ancient woodland. We did cover this at a recent committee where we had veteran trees, which are a slightly similar but different thing. So I think those 3, my advice would be properly following the development plan and the guidance that we're required to. I find it very difficult to see how you could shift any of those to a benefit column for a harm column. You might have slightly differing views on the extent of the harm, and you might have slightly differing views on what other benefits there might be, whether there's, for example, a heritage benefit to do with bringing back a building. But I don't see that you could properly, in your decision making, shift any of those 3 from being a harm to a benefit, and I think that's just clarification advice that's useful to provide.
I suppose, sat through these things quite a few times now. The difficulty, isn't it, is getting a supportable argument that it is in fact an appropriate development in the greenbelt, because that's what it will come down to when it goes to inspectors. So and I'm also key about without a strong argument. It's a bit sort of weak, isn't it? I suppose Katrina can give us advice here, because it has to be reasonable, you see. And I think that's a very strong test, isn't it? It's a very high bar, Katrina.
It is, and it has to have robust reasons that would be defensible, and and we might, I would caution against it. My very strong legal advice is just to reiterate the points that Adrian's made about those 3 points. You just can't flip them. You've got by definition inappropriate development in the green belt. That's set out in policy. You've got no very special circumstances, so you couldn't. There's no reasons that you can give because there's no very special circumstances, and that's not about flipping the planning balance. That's about overcoming the by definition harmful development. And the point about the EA's objection, this is, you can't put a dwelling house in functional floodplain. Lives would be at risk, I think is the, I'm not exaggerating to scare members, I'm making the point. That's why the functional floodplain exists. And your planning officers has already given you the information that the EA don't accept those mitigations in terms of the functional floodplain. So those two are absolutely fundamental. And the point about the ancient woodland again, and I would just add consistency of decision making. So it would be and also setting precedent. So it would be a very poor decision. It wouldn't be a defensible decision in the light of any judicial review. And just because I Googled it, I know that ancient woodland is woodland that's been in existence since AD 1600.
Older than most of us. We've got those 2 propositions there.
I think it's right to come back.
Would you?
Yeah, I think it's right to come back, Chair. I take on board the moving across of harm to benefit. I take that, and I replace that with special circumstances under Greenbelt in respect of the derelict site, the heritage, the historic buildings, the managing of the site, and the history that's gone along here. I tend to say the benefit because I think the woodland and historic woodland is great if it's looked after and maintained. If it's left just to rot and fall away, it doesn't really maintain its status as woodland. But again, put that into the other column of benefit. So I totally get what you're saying. You can't move that across. There is harm to the green belt, but I don't see it as significant as the benefit is my point on that. And also the same with the woodland and the flooding. Obviously, I take it on board what you're saying, but at the same time, we see countries like Holland and everyone else. We're just not there yet, but we will get there at some point. We're just not there yet. Being able to live in a floodplain, but I do see mitigating circumstances being put around everything. But I take that on board. So my view is that there are more benefits than what are on the list. And that's my opinion and why I've proposed what I've proposed. I don't see it as moving one across the other. I just see the harm is less than the benefit on some of the cases. I take on board the garden flood risk. I accept that is something that's there. Thank you.
So, proposition as made.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to reiterate, I would agree with the benefits, but I'm saying that the green belt, the floodplain, well, the green belt is a harm, but I'm looking at the special circumstances, and I think it might not be listed, but there's other weightings in favour. So the green belt stays as a harm, but I think it potentially is offset. The floodplain is clearly, yes, it's in the floodplain. Can it be mitigated? I think potentially. And then the ancient woodland piece, as I say, is a bit tricky because of the state of the land. It's not being cared for, so it's not really being preserved. So for me, it's a weighting decision as opposed to flipping it.
Well, we've got the 2 propositions, and we'll address any functional problems depending on what the outcome is going forward. The first proposition was to follow the opposite recommendations to reject this proposed by Councillor Tizzy, according to the conditions set out by the officers, seconded by Councillor Luxton. So can we have a name vote, please? For that one, the full proposition is, as you can see, I'll let you read it.
Thank you. So we have a motion proposed by councillor Teasy and seconded by councillor Luxton to refuse planning permission for the reasons given in section 14.
Or
Councillor Karen Davis,
Or
councillor Knowles,
or
councillor Luxton,
For.
councillor Teasy,
For.
councillor Wilson.
Against.
Thank you. That's 5 for, 2 against. The motion is carried.
In that case, councillor Buckley, your motion falls away as not supported. There you go. We now move on to agenda item number 7, the planning appeals received and decisions thereof. Everybody should have read this well before the meeting. Are we mandated to approve? Agreed to approve? Agreed. Therefore, that is agreed. Panel and officers, thank you very much for your time. Again, very interesting evening, I thought, to delve into these